Poe's macabre little fantasy about a grandfather who becomes an immortal bloodsucker bears many of the filmmaker's trademarks: gruesome makeup effects, a fascination with mythology, and most importantly, a lot of love. Federico Lupi plays an elderly antique dealer who discovers, quite by accident, a clockwork device that grants eternal life and eternal thirst. But although he's driven to lick blood off the floors of bathrooms, he's also fighting with every fiber of himself to remain a good man. Del Toro's story takes him to heroic heights and horrifying lows, but we get the impression that the filmmaker believes in his tormented hero. Number 47. Misery. Stephen King's frightening novel about a novelist trapped in a house with his number one fan is a masterpiece of claustrophobic horror. James Caan plays Paul Sheldon, whose car wipes out in a snowstorm and finds himself bedridden, with Annie Wilkes, played by Kathy Bates, who really loves his work and who takes advantage of his infirmity to force him to write his latest novel to her disturbing specifications. Annie Wilkes is the ultimate example of fandom gone awry. Number 46. The Dead Zone. Christopher Walken is perfect in this Stephen King adaptation as a man who loses everything but gains psychic powers in exchange. Director David Cronenberg really goes there, bringing the tragedy of Walken's character to bear on first a murder mystery and then a potentially more devastating and sweeping mass murder via Martin Sheen as a delusional presidential hopeful. Number 45. Ringu. American audiences are more familiar with the remake, Gore Verbinski's The Ring, but Hideo Nakata's version has a spectral allure all its own. A reporter discovers a videotape with shocking imagery and a curse upon it, damning the viewer to die 1 week after viewing it. To save her life, and eventually the life of her child, she has to discover the source of the spirit photography and hopefully put a vengeful spirit to rest. Number 44. The Orphanage. This film was an almost instant classic upon its release, helped along by horror fanboy Guillermo del Toro, who served as executive producer. It avoids cheap scares with nods to the Gothic, even while not submitting fully to its tropes. The story keeps you guessing as Aurelia unravels the tragic history of her home while searching for her missing adopted son Simon and the motives of childhood disease, disfigurement, and death give the film slightly more staying the inventive hide-and-seek game taught to Simon by creepy orphaned ghost kids gives viewers just the right amount of "I know what's about to happen, but I still can't look away" fright. Number 43. Audition. It's almost impossible to talk about Takashi Miike's audition without ruining it. Audition starts out like a romantic comedy about a single man who holds an audition for a new girlfriend, only to find himself attracted to a young woman with, let's just say, serious issues, and let that hang there. Audition lures you into a false sense of security, then throws you off of a ledge and rips out the safety net. To call it shocking is to do a serious disservice to the word. It's a vicious punchline preceded by an even crueler joke, and there's nothing else quite like it. Number 42. The Omen. It's easy, but not altogether inaccurate, to say The Omen was just the latest in a long line of hot-button Catholic horror thrillers like Rosemary's Baby and The Exorcist. And while Richard Donner's film isn't as subtle or as insightful as Polanski or Friedkin's classics, its forthright approach to the story of the Antichrist is thrilling and satisfying. Number 41. Videodrome. Videodrome isn't just a horror movie. It's a fever dream brought on by late night study sessions with too much caffeine and too many media studies textbooks. James Woods stars as the head of a sleazy television station on the hunt for the next tawdry attention getter when he stumbles across a pirated signal for Videodrome depicting an all too realistic torture. No plot, no themes, just snuff. Number 40. Dead of Night. There are lots of horror anthologies in the world. Few are as good or as influential as Dead of Night. The setup is simple. A man arrives at a country cottage and believes he has seen everyone there before in a dream. So they try to calm his rattled nerves by telling them spooky stories that inspired them all to believe in the supernatural. Some of them are silly, but most are sincere and ethereal, and the segment starring Michael Redgrave as a ventriloquist who believes his doll is real, a trope that would become more popular later, features one of the legendary actor's finest performances. Number 39. Pan's Labyrinth. Guillermo del Toro is considered a horror filmmaker, and that makes sense. He's made a lot of horror movies, but a film like Pan's Labyrinth offers another perspective, seems to reveal that he's weaving fairy tales first and foremost, and that they atmospheric American-British remake produced under the revived Hammer banner managed the impossible to deliver on the tragic emotion and dark horror of the original while adding its own distinctive touches to one of the unlikeliest love stories in cinema. The melancholy fills every frame as we follow the strange path that the often bullied Owen and his new protector Abby take after meeting in the snow, even while the movie adapts classic vampire mythology to a more modern setting. Number 37. The Devil's Backbone. The Spanish Civil War provides an unsettling backdrop for more than one of Guillermo del Toro's movies. In The Devil's Backbone, it's responsible for killing young Carlos's father and stranding him at an orphanage with an unexploded bomb in the courtyard and a ghost with blood floating from his wounds, promising that many of you will die. The Devil's Backbone is a children's story packed with kids who dare each other to overcome their fears, even as they are all endangered by the coming war and the violent urges of someone in their midst. Guillermo del Toro has an exquisite sympathy for all of these children, even the dead ones, and even the ones who grew up to be monsters. It's that sensitivity that makes The Devil's Backbone more than just another spooky story. It's also a supernatural drama of the highest order. Number 36. Frankenstein. The horror movie genre was still in its infancy when James Whale got to it, but you'd never know it by watching his films. Frankenstein is a bravura example of Gothic showpersonship, full of lighting and castles and obsession and sadness. It shoves more movie into 71 minutes than many 2-hour-plus summer blockbusters can manage. Number 35. The Night of the Hunter. Few horror movies capture the strength and vulnerability of children as honestly or as lyrically as Charles Laughton's The Night of the Hunter. The film is about a young boy and a young girl who get a new father, Harry Powell, a preacher played by Robert Mitchum. Harry has very particular ideas about violence, and his new children have something he wants, and he'll do anything to get it. The Night of the Hunter plays out like a demonic picture book, full of big images and exaggerated ideas. It's told from the perspective of children who are living out their greatest fears, who cannot imagine waking up but fight on anyway. And although the nobility of the childlike spirit is celebrated, the takeaway one can't help but put in your pocket is that the world really is as big and scary as they say it is. Number 34. The Babadook. Jennifer Kent's debut feature is an elegant, psychologically dense horror film which taps into various traditions without ever feeling the slightest bit derivative. It's an instant stories and cooks him nutritious dinners. She secretly can't stand him. She pulls away when she should be pulling him close. And it's into this troubled home that the Babadook worms his way. Number 33. Train to Busan. Teaching the American movie-making machine a thing or two about how to make a blockbuster action epic with heart, filled with charismatic and compelling characters, nail-biting tension, and stunning set pieces. This apocalyptic zombie ride reinvigorated the genre with its central father-daughter story and inventive take on the by now familiar zombie rules. Setting most of the action on the vehicle makes for a tightly contained and roller coaster-like ride of a story that unfolds over 2 hours with little chance of you catching your breath. Number 32. Martyrs. Few horror movies elicit as extreme a physical reaction quite like 2008's Martyrs. This low-budget French language film is smart, bleak, and absolutely unforgettable for those willing to stomach its brutal imagery. Divided into 2 distinct parts, the first half is a suburban poltergeist thriller that delves into the subconscious and past trauma of our heroine. The way she stalked around the home is utterly chilling. But Martyrs makes its turn. The film transforms into a bizarre religious gore fest that draws a link between spiritual enlightenment and utterly brutal physical and emotional torture. It's tough to keep your eyes set on the horrifying images that unfold on screen, but for those willing to dive into its themes, it's even harder to look away. Number 31. Repulsion. Carol is a wallflower in Roman Polanski's Repulsion, a quiet girl who seems repulsed by anybody other than her sister. So when her sister leaves on vacation and Carol is left home all alone, she retreats and retreats further and further until her apartment is her own mind, full of anxieties and traumas and clutching arms. Few films capture a descent into madness as vividly as Repulsion. The way her world gradually warps to match her haunted perceptions feels disturbingly natural, as though the film is nurturing psychological horror in a greenhouse and inviting the audience to watch it grow. Number 30. Jacob's Ladder. Adrian Lynn's tormented drama stars Tim Robbins as a Vietnam veteran tortured by violent memories of the war and memories of a family long lost, and by visions of men with no faces and of his girlfriend impaled. Is he losing his mind? Was he the victim of chemical warfare? Whatever the answers, Jacob's Ladder depicts a man's life being ripped away. His sanity is shattered, his connections to other people irreparably frayed. Number 29. Hellraiser. Parker's Hellraiser is one of the most memorable horror films of the past several decades, not simply because of its nameless, aesthetically dynamic villain, later to be named Pinhead by fans, but also because of its ruthlessly bleak and gut-wrenchingly horrific view of the human condition. The film, like its literary namesake, The Hellbound Heart, is about lust, for power, for pleasure, for life and love, and the terrible, blood-soaked price that the human heart will pay to fulfill its desires. Number 28. Get Out. Writer-director Jordan Peele's film combines classic genre tropes with issues of racism to create something fresh and dynamic and deeply unsettling. When Chris heads to the countryside to meet the family of his girlfriend Rose, he quickly realizes that something is amiss in this too disarming household. What follows is an often tense, sometimes funny, but ultimately gripping tale that poses some uncomfortable questions throughout while keeping the audience on the edge of their seat. Number 27. Scream. Both director Wes Craven and writer Kevin Williamson had plenty of success in their career, but Scream remains a big highlight for both men. Williamson's script managed to deftly be so many things. It was a sly meta self-parody about the horror genre that didn't cross the line into goofiness, while also playing as a successful whodunit and, most importantly, an effective horror film in and of itself. Finally, a group of horror movie characters made it clear that yes, they'd seen all the same movies we had and were aware of the rules and cliches that come with the genre. But no one was more knowledgeable than the killer, who toyed with the victims by asking them horror movie trivia that plenty of us in the audience could have fun playing along with. But when the killer actually showed himself, it was terrifying, with several extremely well-executed suspense scenes by Craven, which proved again just how good he was with this sort of material. A movie that set out to simultaneously make the audience laugh, cheer, and yes, scream. Number 26. Nosferatu. Count Orlok is moving to Germany, and he's bringing pestilence and shadows with him. F.W. Murnau's shameless ripoff of Bram Stoker's Dracula does away with the sensuality that many associate with the undead monster, revealing the vampire to be a sad and rat-like creature, tormented by isolation and completely wrong for the modern world. Number 25. The Cabin in the Woods. Some high concepts tower over all the others. Drew Goddard's The Cabin in the Woods, co-written by Joss Whedon, is the story of a group of college kids who travel to, yes, a cabin in the woods and get besieged by what you might call a zombie redneck torture family. But is also the story of two white-collar office drones who watch the slaughter in real time and make damn well sure it hits every cliche imaginable. And somehow it all makes sense. Number 24. The Blair Witch Project. The movie that gave birth to the whole horror movie as faux documentary, aka found footage, and that inspired such films as Paranormal Activity and the like. The Blair Witch Project is quite an effective scarefest in retrospect. Some of its then inspired choices in the realm of is it or is it not real seems dated and obvious now, given the fact that nowadays the internet seemingly sets out to reveal spoilers that surround projects like this. But Blair Witch came out in 1999, when the internet was in its infancy. Number 23. The Vitch. A family that's too religious, even for Puritan colonial America, strikes out on their own at the start of Robert Eggers' absorbing historical horror tale. So, when tragedy strikes, there is nowhere to turn but inward, and the guilt, hypocrisy, and paranoia build up inside a father, a mother, their children, and yes, even their goat. Eventually, those feelings will explode, but until then, we are completely absorbed by Eggers' exemplary period detail, distinctive colonial language, and keen observations about early religious fervor. Whatever doubts you may have about whether The Vitch is about an actual witch, salient points are being made about living as though religion is literal and evil is more than just a concept. The Vitch is a disturbing horror movie. It's an insightful drama. It's a damning indictment. It's one of the most ambitious horror movies of the century, and it all takes place on a tiny little farm. Number 22. Dracula. All of today's mega popular vampire franchises owe a debt of gratitude to Count Dracula. And as much as Bram Stoker's original novel helped popularize the vampire story, it was Universal's 1931 adaptation that cemented the image of Dracula in the minds of most moviegoers. Dracula condenses and combines many of the main characters from the novel, opening with the poor Mr. Renfield's arrival in Transylvania. After falling victim to Dracula's influence, the pair head to London so Dracula can feast on the city's inhabitants. Only the courageous Dr. Seward, his ally Professor Van Helsing, and their friends can prevent Dracula from slaughtering innocents and making the fair Mina his newest bride. Dracula isn't the scariest film by modern standards. What it does have is plenty of atmosphere and a very memorable take on the lead villain. This adaptation diverged from the source by making Dracula a handsome, charismatic figure, and Bela Lugosi captured the imaginations of millions with his performance as Dracula. For course, it was a role that would follow him for the rest of his life, and it remains the definitive portrayal of this classic villain for many. Number 21. 28 Days Later. The zombie genre is bigger now than ever, and you have 28 Days Later to thank for it. The genre was practically dead by the time Danny Boyle and screenwriter Alex Garland gave zombies a much-needed shot of adrenaline with this film. Literally, this movie is pumped up on adrenaline. The zombies, or infected, sprint through the movie, spawning endless debates about whether fast zombies are scarier than slow zombies. What mattered most is that 28 Days Later was more than a visceral horror experience. A great cast and a smart script treated the concept with sincerity and severity, and Boyle's digital cinematography gave the film an immediacy that hadn't been matched at that time. If zombies did take over the earth, this is surely what it would look and feel like, and it would be terrifying. Number 20. The Fly, 1986. David Cronenberg's very R-rated, very intense, and very excellent remake of The Fly puts Jeff Goldblum in the role of Seth Brundle, a scientist who invents telepods meant to change the world. Instead, they change him into a man-fly monster when a fly accidentally gets trapped in one of the machines as Seth teleports from one pod to another. Number 19. An American Werewolf in London. It rarely hurts to merge horror with a tinge of comedy, and John Landis's An American Werewolf in London is one of the finer examples of that combination. It's also one of several iconic werewolf movies that hit theaters in 1981. Of the trio, American Werewolf remains the most popular and well-loved. The film follows two backpackers traveling the English countryside. When only one survives an attack by a vicious wolf, he becomes convinced he's been infected by the werewolf's curse. And it wouldn't be much of a werewolf movie if he turned out to be wrong. Number 18. Let the Right One In. This most unusual of love stories is a Swedish film which hit it big internationally with its tale of a 12-year-old boy and his centuries-old vampire who looks like a 12-year-old girl, but most certainly isn't. Number 17. Suspiria. Dario Argento's 1977 masterpiece, Suspiria, zombie genre single-handedly in 1968 with Night of the Living Dead. 10 years later, he refined the formula with Dawn of the Dead. Far bigger, gorier, and funnier than its predecessor, Dawn of the Dead remains Romero's definitive work. Dawn opens up with a glimpse of a major metropolitan area falling to chaos during the zombie outbreak. It isn't long before our four heroes are forced to leave town and barricade themselves inside a shopping mall. But as it turns out, the undead hordes still retain enough of their old selves to feel the need to shop and consume. The true brilliance of Dawn is how it combined straight up zombie carnage with a healthy dose of satire and social commentary. Number 15. A Nightmare on Elm Street. By 1984, the slasher movie had been done to death. Just how many masked killers could you see before fatigue set in? But Wes Craven had a brilliant twist on these types of films. First, he created a killer, Freddy Krueger, who instantly stood out from the rest of the pack. His face was burned beyond recognition, but Freddy wore no mask and didn't stay silent. In fact, he had plenty of cruel taunts for his victims. More importantly, his domain was the dream world, where he could stalk and terrorize without any rules to bind him. If you ran away from him, he could just as easily be waiting for you as you approached. There was nowhere to hide from Freddy, because we all have to sleep sometime, right? Number 14. Poltergeist. After Poltergeist, all of a sudden, quaint cookie-cutter houses everywhere became haunted death traps, ravaged by violent Native American ghosts who aren't too pleased about their current state of unrest. Director Tobe Hooper and producer Steven Spielberg created a masterwork that took the ghost story out of ancient castles and haunted mansions and shoved it, without apology, into the happy suburban track home. Number 13. The Thing. An alien with the ability smoke weed and hang out at a cemetery and let them run out of gas in the wrong part of Texas. Then throw in the skin-suited Leatherface and some meat hooks, and you've got yourself a film that barely found a distributor because of its extreme levels of graphic violence. Number 11. Rosemary's Baby. You'll be surprised how much this unsettling creepshow from 1968 gets away with for, being in 1968. Roman Polanski's most conventional film outside of Chinatown is one of his best, telling the slow burn story of a young New York couple who move into an apartment building which happens to be home to several Satan worshippers who want to use Rosemary's spawn as a means for Mr. Devil McBrimstone to visit to our mortal realm. Polanski's less is more approach to delivering chills further supports the storytelling rule that the more kept off screen, the more the audience has to imagine. Number 10. Night of the Living Dead. In 1968, director George Romero took the frightening idea of zombification, which up until that point had been relegated to creepy voodoo tales, and created a terrifying new genre of horror, the zombie apocalypse film. They're Coming to Get You, Barbara became the first official I'll be back of horror, as poor Judith O'Dea has to flee a cemetery because the dead have inexplicably come back to life and started walking the earth in search of human flesh. Number 9. Evil Dead 2. Though more of a remix than a sequel, Evil Dead 2 improves on its predecessor in almost every way. More gore, more comedy, more. Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell and Ash returned to the woods after 6 years for Evil Dead 2, which leans into the gruesome excess of the first, but ups the ante to a ridiculous degree. Though Evil Dead 2 didn't invent slapstick, it sure did perfect it, and went on to influence countless other comedy gross-outs. Number 8. The Silence of the Lambs. Using a serial killer cannibal with a doctorate to help catch another serial killer is as bare bones as you can get with this Best Picture Oscar winner. But the movie is much more than that. It's the scariest film ever made, built around psychology and deduction, with both used as crime-solving tools and murder weapons. Number 7. Jaws. The scariest movie Spielberg's ever made, Jaws is equal parts monster movie and character piece, centered on an island called Amity that's preyed upon by something that leaves teeth the size of shot glasses in the hulls of boats and turns their owners into decapitated flotsam. The late Roy Schneider gives a career-defining performance as Chief Brody, the local sheriff with a fear of water who is put in charge of taking down the murder fish. Number 6. Alien. Alien movies are generally thought of as being planted was a long way removed from the Star Wars and Star Treks of Hollywood. Alien is set several centuries in the future when humanity has ventured into the stars. The crew of the mining vessel Nostromo become unwitting hosts to a bloodthirsty alien life form, and one by one they fall to an enemy that hides in the shadows and springs from above. Number 5. Bride of Frankenstein. This film is the apex of the universal cycle of classic monster pictures in terms of quality. Rather than simply regurgitating a cheap variation on the first Frankenstein, Whale opted to flesh out the story and characters of the original. Karloff, in his second turn as the monster, granted his most famous creation the gift of speech here, and of friendship, and even love. Also of humor. Bride of Frankenstein is a comedy as much as it is a horror film. Number 4. Halloween. Psycho can be seen as the film that birthed the slasher genre, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre was an integral step in its progress, making things more visceral. But it was Halloween that truly defined this subgenre in horror, inspiring a million sequels, rip-offs, imitations, and homages. Take an instantly identifiable holiday, add in a chillingly silent, unstoppable masked killer, and a feisty, resourceful heroine, and you have Halloween. And of course, all the films that came after it. But John Carpenter brought a sense of tension and suspense few others could match in a slasher film, as we watched Michael Myers stalk Laurie Strode from afar before going on his inevitable killing spree. Michael himself is an excellent villain, wearing a blank, emotionless mask that perfectly captured the black soul of someone who simply killed and seemingly couldn't be stopped, no matter what you did to him. It's no wonder Michael became a horror icon, and that fans rebelled when he didn't appear in Halloween 3. After all, Michael Myers and Halloween are now forever intertwined. Number 3. Psycho. Psycho is both one of the greatest thrillers of all time and one of the greatest entries in Alfred Hitchcock's legendary resume. A true master of suspense and tension, Hitchcock crafted a memorable horror experience with a limited cast and even more limited budget. Like so many great horror movies, Psycho's scares far exceed its scale. Psycho is the story of crazy old Norman Bates and his even crazier mother. When a young woman on the run from the law arrives at the remote Bates Motel, she falls victim to a knife-wielding killer. Several more victims are claimed before the killer is brought to justice, and the true secret of the Bates family stands revealed. The content of Psycho isn't as shocking as it was way back in 1960. However, it's a testament to Hitchcock's skill as a director that Psycho remains a tense and nerve-wracking experience. Number 2. The Exorcist. music arrangement ever made. The movie's premise, a little girl possessed by a demon, is scary enough as words on paper. But what director William Friedkin does with it, aside from prove that he has a seriously strong constitution for this sort of stuff, is treat the extraordinary of it all as if it were really happening next door to us. The scare comes from a place based in faith, where heaven and hell are as real as your beliefs in them care to be. Faith, for all the documentation on the subject, is tethered to the intangible. It's not something science can define or strategize. The demon that comes from the exorcist's interpretation of that idea is something more powerful than a Freddy or a Jason. Something that can't be shot or stabbed or detonated. And number 1, The Shining. Stanley Kubrick's movie adaptation of The Shining is almost certainly the most popular Stephen King film. The project was an unusually commercially focused one for Kubrick, but the same stylistic elements that defined his earlier films were on full display, and the film remains a haunting and unsettling chronicle of a family man's psychological breakdown. Jack Nicholson plays Jack Torrance in this adaptation. Torrance is a struggling writer who accepts a job as winter caretaker for the Overlook Hotel in the Colorado mountains. The knowledge that the previous caretaker had gone insane and murdered his family fails to scare Jack away. But when both Jack and his physically attuned son begin communing with the many spirits haunting the Overlook, things quickly take a turn for the worse. Deadly hedge mazes, elevators full of blood, and the terrifying room 237 are only some of the horrors that await viewers.